My name is Alicia Brennan, and I am 34 years old. 10 years ago, my family believed my brother's lie that I had walked away from medical school, and that one lie was enough to erase me from their lives. They cut me off, blocked my number, stopped asking questions, and decided they already knew the truth. They did not come to my residency graduation. They were not at my wedding. For 10 years, I lived like I had no parents, no home to go back to, and no place in the family I was born into. Then last month, my brother was rushed into the ER in Washington, and the case landed on my shift. He came in unstable. My parents came in behind him. My uncle was with them, and by the time I stepped into that room in my white coat, everything they had believed for a decade was already starting to crack. My mother looked at me like she had seen a ghost. My father looked confused before he looked afraid. My uncle looked from me to them like he was finally putting together something he should have understood years earlier. And standing there with my brother's chart in my hand and my family staring at me like I should not have existed, I realized the truth had chosen its own timing. By the time I left Durham, the shape of my family had already been set. My father, Daniel Brennan, believed in certainty, in the person who spoke first and sounded sure. My mother, Patricia Brennan, spent most of her life smoothing over whatever sharp edge was closest to her, which usually meant agreeing with the person who made the least noise after getting his way. In our house, that person was my brother, Ryan. He was 4 years older than me, easy with strangers, relaxed in every room, the kind of person people remembered after one conversation. I was quiet, serious, and good at school, which turned out to be a combination adults praise in public and ignore in private. Ryan knew exactly how that worked. He knew our parents liked confidence more than caution and simple stories more than complicated truth. He also knew I had no instinct for performance. For a long time, I thought that was fine. I believed results would speak loudly enough on their own. They never did, at least not in Durham. The first time I felt the balance shift was the spring I got accepted to medical school in Richmond. For about a week, I was the child people called about. My parents looked at me differently. Dinner made space for me in a way I was not used to. And because I was not used to it, I noticed who hated it first. Ryan never said anything obvious enough to be called jealousy. He just smiled the way people do when they are already rearranging the room in their heads. My uncle Mark was the only person who seemed to notice more than he said. He was my mother's older brother, practical, unsentimental, and one of the few people in my family who spoke to me like I did not need to compete for a place at the table. When I got into medical school, he was the first relative who asked me what kind of doctor I wanted to become, instead of treating the acceptance itself as the finish line. By my second year in Richmond, medical school had stopped feeling like a challenge and started feeling like weather. Then Uncle Mark got sick. It began with fatigue, then pain, then scans and specialists, and billing disputes and one of those medical spirals that can swallow a person before he understands what is happening. He was living alone and insisting he was fine when he was not. My mother called me after one of his hospital visits, and for the first time in years, it felt like someone in my family needed what I knew. I drove down that weekend and started helping because someone had to. Then I kept helping because once I saw how disorganized everything was, walking away would have felt like abandoning him. I spoke to an advisor in Richmond, then student affairs, and laid out exactly what was happening. They approved a formal leave. My standing in the program was protected. My place was held. Every part of it was documented. I remember the relief of seeing that approval in writing. It was not defeat. It was not me falling apart. It was a pause with a purpose, one made through the channels I was supposed to use. I told Ryan because I thought keeping him informed was the mature thing to do. He sounded almost thoughtful. He asked how long the leave would last, whether the school had signed off, whether I was sure I could come back without losing momentum. I answered everything plainly because there was nothing to hide. 3 days later, my father called after 10 at night. He did not ask how Uncle Mark was doing. He went straight to accusation. Ryan had told them I was done with medical school, that I had left because I could not handle it, and that helping Mark was just something I was using to cover the truth. I tried to explain the leave in one breath, then another, but Ryan had done something smarter than telling a simple lie. He had taken facts that were real: my time away, Mark's illness, the uncertainty of it, and arranged them into something easier for my parents to believe than complexity. He had told them I was overwhelmed, ashamed, hiding. He had made my silence sound secretive instead of busy, and my practical decisions sound like collapse. I gave them the name of the office that approved my leave. I told them there were forms, signatures, emails, dates. None of it landed. By the end of that call, I understood something I had been too hopeful to understand before. Ryan had gotten to them first. He had told them a version of me that matched the one they had always feared was hiding underneath the quiet daughter who worked too hard and said too little. Once that version was in the room, the truth had almost no space left to enter. After that, everything became procedural. I sent the approval from student affairs, the confirmation from the program, the documentation showing my leave was temporary and in good standing. I sent contact information so they could verify every word. There was no reply. I sent a second email, longer this time. My father blocked my number before the end of the second day. My mother lasted a little longer. Long enough for me to leave 2 messages she never returned. Long enough for me to tell her I was still the same person I had been the week before. When she blocked me, it hurt more than my father doing it. His rejection felt like judgment. Hers felt like consent. I mailed a packet after that. Printed emails, copies of the leave approval, a letter in my own handwriting, and a note on top asking them to read everything before they called Ryan again. I paid for tracking because I wanted certainty somewhere in the process. The envelope made it to Durham 2 days later. It came back to Richmond at the end of the week with my mother's handwriting on the front. Return to sender is such an ordinary phrase until it is directed at you. I asked Uncle Mark to talk to them anyway. He did. He called my father, then my mother, then tried again that evening. He got nowhere. Ryan had already given them a version of events that protected their pride. Believing me now would have required them to admit they had chosen him too quickly. For 5 days, I kept trying with the kind of discipline I usually reserve for school. Calls, emails, records, another letter, another message through Mark. Every attempt ended the same way: silence, blockage, refusal. I was 24 years old, splitting my time between medical paperwork and my uncle's appointments, and discovering that family rejection does not always arrive like a dramatic scene. Sometimes it arrives like a series of completed actions. Number blocked, message ignored, envelope returned. Then I ran out of places to knock. So, I got up the next morning and kept moving. I drove Mark to appointments, sat beside him during consultations, argued with billing offices, and helped him through treatment until his situation stabilized enough for me to step back. Then I gathered my paperwork, confirmed my return to Richmond, and went back to medical school with one hard truth settled in me. I was not building a future my family would celebrate. I was building one I would have to survive alone. Back in Richmond, I stopped checking family numbers. I stopped imagining apologies. I put my energy into rotations, exams, overnight shifts, and the discipline of becoming someone whose life could not be undone by a lie told in another state. I finished medical school. I stayed for residency. Training stripped everyone down to what they could actually do, and in that environment I learned something that took me years to understand. Competence reaches people in ways personality sometimes does not. You can be overlooked at a family table for half your life and still become impossible to ignore in a hospital if you know what you are doing under pressure. I moved into emergency medicine under Dr. Naomi Ellis, who was direct, unsentimental, and allergic to self-pity. She noticed everything. She pushed me toward the version of myself that did not need permission to belong in the room. I met Ethan during my 3rd year of residency. He was a policy attorney, dry enough to be funny without trying, and patient in a way I did not know how to trust at first. He listened more than he spoke, which meant I ended up telling him more than I had planned to. He never told me to forgive my family. He simply treated the facts of my life as facts, and let me see how different that felt. My residency graduation came and went. Uncle Mark was there. Dr. Ellis was there. Ethan was there. My parents were not. Ryan was not. I married Ethan 2 years later. Uncle Mark walked me down the aisle. My parents did not call. They did not send a card. Years later, after Ethan and I had moved north and I was working as an attending physician in Washington, I learned Ryan had not been content with one lie. A woman named Tessa Monroe, who had worked in academic administration before moving into credentialing, told me over coffee that a man from North Carolina had called years earlier asking loaded questions about my status, my leave, and whether there had ever been concerns about my professionalism. She had logged it as an inappropriate inquiry and shut it down. By then, I no longer needed proof that Ryan had kept working behind the scenes. I just needed the pattern to make sense. Then one night shift in Washington, the truth came back to me on a trauma alert. Single male, unstable on arrival, possible internal injuries after a crash. I reached for the incoming chart and saw the name, before my brain had time to protect me from it. Ryan Brennan. For 1 second, the hallway narrowed around one line of text. Then training took over. I asked for imaging, notified surgery to stand by, and moved toward the room because whatever else Ryan was to me, he was also the patient coming through my doors. He came in pale, barely responsive, with blood on his shirt and bruising rising along one side of his abdomen. I did not let myself stand there as a sister. I read the monitor, checked his airway, assessed what mattered first, and gave the orders that needed giving. Fluids, labs, imaging, pain control, consults, reassessment. His condition was serious but manageable, the kind of case that can tilt the wrong way if people hesitate. We did not hesitate. Then a nurse quietly told me his family had arrived. I looked through the glass first. My mother was there in the clothes she had thrown on in a rush, one hand gripping her purse. My father stood beside her, rigid in that familiar way that used to mean control and now looked more like shock held upright. Uncle Mark was with them, shoulders tense, face set. I could have handed the case off. No one would have questioned it. But Ryan was already stabilized, and leaving at that point would have felt less honest than staying. So, I finished what needed to be done, reviewed the scan results, confirmed surgery was not immediately required, and walked toward the family area with his chart in my hand and my badge visible on my coat. My mother recognized me first. Her eyes lifted to my face, dropped to the badge, then came back to me with the expression of someone watching two realities collide. She grabbed my father's arm so hard he flinched. He looked at me like he was trying to force my existence into a framework that no longer held. I gave them the update the same way I would have given it to any family. Ryan had significant injuries, but he was stable for the moment. He needed monitoring and careful observation through the night. He was not in the clear, but he was alive. My mother kept staring. My father barely seemed to hear the medical details, because the larger fact had already taken all the oxygen out of the room. I had not disappeared. I had not failed. I had not become the cautionary story they had accepted in my place. I was standing in front of them in a hospital in Washington, responsible for their son's care, speaking with the calm authority of a physician who had spent years earning every word. They were now too stunned to interrupt. What I remember most is how quiet they became. Morning made everything harder to avoid. Ryan regained consciousness in uneven stages. Even through the medication, I recognized the same instinct that had shaped the last 10 years of my life. He was already trying to calculate the room. He looked at my badge, then at my face, and I knew he understood the one thing he had spent a decade preventing. The story he had built had finally run out of space. Later that day, Uncle Mark asked if I could spare 10 minutes in a consultation room away from Ryan's floor. I said yes because by then, avoidance would only have stretched out something already finished. When I stepped into the room, my mother looked worn thin from crying. My father looked older than he had the night before. Mark was standing near the table with a folder, his glasses, and his phone laid out in front of him like he had come prepared to do what should have been done years earlier. What followed was not explosive. No one shouted. It was orderly, factual, and almost clinical, which made it worse. Mark started with the things I had sent in those first days after Ryan lied. The approved leave, the confirmation from my program, the contact information my parents could have used if they had wanted to verify anything at all. He showed them timestamps, dates, the photograph of the envelope my mother had returned unopened. Then he added the records from the months I was helping him through treatment appointments, billing notices, transportation receipts, specialist notes. The lie had always been impossible. It had only needed people willing to check. Then he added Tessa's written statement. Years earlier, Ryan had contacted administrative offices more than once under weak pretenses, asking questions meant to draw out something damaging about my leave, my status, or my professionalism. He found nothing because there was nothing to find. At that point, there was nowhere left for him to hide. My father did not interrupt once. My mother looked down at the table like she could not bear for the evidence to be attached to her own memory. Mark was not cruel, but he was finished being gentle. He told them the truth neither of them had made themselves sit with. Ryan had lied, yes, but they had made the lie durable. They had not been tricked for 10 years. They had participated. My parents apologized later, away from the hospital, my mother first. My father after her, in the blunt, damaged language of a man who had waited until apology was useless to try it. I listened. Then I told them the only truth that mattered. 10 years is not a misunderstanding. 10 years is a pattern made of choices. They had not lost me in one mistake or one bad phone call. They had handed me away repeatedly. Every time they chose not to verify, not to read, not to call, and not to ask themselves why their son needed my life to sound ruined in order to feel secure inside his own. That was why there would be no rebuilding, no careful re-entry, no future holiday dressed up as healing. I had built a real life without them, a marriage that was solid, a career I had earned, a home that felt calm, and I was not going to place that peace back into the hands of people who had already thrown it away once. Ryan would live with the collapse of his credibility. My parents would live with the knowledge that when the truth finally stood in front of them, breathing and undeniable, they had already spent 10 years choosing comfort over character. As for me, I left them where they had left me long ago, outside the life that mattered most. If there is any lesson in my story, it is this. The truth can arrive late and still matter, but lateness does not cancel consequences. And love without accountability is just loyalty to whatever feels easiest in the moment. If you ever have to choose between begging to be believed and building a life, anyway, choose the life.